Well, I don't do a lot of woodworking anymore, but for one reason or another I bought this 1991 Corvette, a C4 that I use as a daily driver, and I just love it. The thing goes fast. Not fast enough, but it goes fast. But one thing that we need to do is fix the gear shift knob. Looks a little bit ratty. So, I'll try to do a little more woodworking. What I've done is I've taken white oak and walnut, ran them through my surfacer, and got them down to bar. I've got a stack of wood about 1/4 inch thick. And I'm going to glue those up and then start shaping up the gear shift knob. So I've got all my 1/4 inch thick walnut and oak blocks laid out, starting to glue them up. When I get them all assembled, I'll put them over in the vise and put the squeeze on them. So in the space of about 10 minutes or so, I've got the wood glued up in the vise. Got a drill press vise that I actually made when I went to UNI in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and just a machinist vise, high and low, so we'll let that glue dry for a day and then we'll come out and start shaping up the gear shift knob. Well, here's a favorite piece of my woodworking equipment, a wood lathe. I'm getting ready to chuck up this block between the two centers, and I've marked dead center right there of the center oak block. That's important because when we get all done we want the equal parts of oak and walnut to be symmetrical with a new gear shift knob. So we'll chuck it up in the lathe and get that going and start shaping this wood down. Well, we're about ready to turn the wood lathe on for the first time. When we use these calipers to size up this old rubber and leather gear shift ball. It's a good ergonomic design. I like it a lot, so I'm going to try to mimic it fairly close with this wood one that I do. So we'll turn on the lathe and we'll get going here. We'll set the speed fairly low because we've got to knock all of those corners off of that block. I'll use a half round. Pull it across this block repeatedly. The next thing I'll do is start to form this taper in here. You can see I've already started on a little bit. Turn on the lathe and form that taper. Well, you can start to see the general shape of the new gear shift knob taking place. I've got to take and do a bias cut across here to kind of match this angle. But you can start to see the symmetry in the oak and the walnut. You've got the narrowest band of oak, wider walnut, wider oak, wider still walnut. And when you get over to the side, you see that oak band and a similar one on the other side. So the next step is really to take it out of the lathe and start working it down further out in the shop. Well, any other car but a Corvette, making a gear shift knob wouldn't be that difficult because you just have thread in the gear shift knob and a jam nut beneath it to lock it in place. Typical Corvette, they need about 10 moving parts to do the same thing. It's got a reverse interlock that goes up and down and a milled keyway in there. So I've spent the afternoon today taking this 3/8 rod coupler, tapping it out with a 9/16 fine thread tap, and then cutting a slot in it for this interlock pin right here. It'll kind of pin pin the knob in place. So it's a rather complicated mechanism, but I wanted to try to keep it. I think you'd have to keep it, really. I don't know what else to do with it. So the next piece of the puzzle is to take this 3/8 rod coupling that I drilled out and tapped to 9/16 fine thread and get that inserted into this wood knob that I'm building. You can see the old one, probably can't see it, but internally it's got some threads up inside it. And we're going to do the same thing by drilling this new knob. Well, I have my wood blank that came out of the lathe, and while it was on the lathe I took a parting tool and I squared up this end pretty nice. So before I cut that off, which is just waste, it's nice and square, I'm going to set it on the drill press and drill the hole for this pipe coupling sleeve that I've worked on. So I'm getting ready to do that. It's a little bit dangerous, so I've got a Kevlar glove on that'll grip it very well. So I'm going to turn the camera off and do that drilling job now. Well, I've completed the drilling operation, and it's just a snug fit on the high points of this sleeve that I've been working on, so it'll fit in there. Eventually I'll get it fit well. I'll push it into place and lock it in place with some epoxy. But at this point I'm ready to start machining this down a little bit further. This end here can be cut off with a bandsaw. This part can be cut off with a bandsaw. I'll start putting the tapered edge on the end of it and working it on down further from there. One of the things I need to do is cut the top of this Gearshift off on a taper, which will mimic the stock Corvette shift knob that I really like. Feels good in your hand. And so I've got a line here, and to do that I need to keep the wood laminations oriented perfectly perpendicular to the table of the bandsaw. And since it's cylindrical, it's going to be hard to do. It's going to want to roll back and forth. So what I'm going to do is take and glue this end to a block that'll hold it perfectly perpendicular to the base of the saw. So we'll get a little glue, we'll glue the Gearshift knob onto a waste block, and then we'll make that cut. So with the Gearshift knob glued to this piece of waste block, there's two things that I can do. One is to cut the pitch of the wood to match the stock Corvette Gearshift knob right here. So I'm going to cut up there. The other thing I can do is, if you notice the Corvette Gearshift knob, it's got a little bit of a curl in it right here. I really like that. You could kind of hook your fingers behind it. So I've marked that out on the wood knob here. I can run it through the blade kind of like this. This is stuff I've got to do with both hands, so I need to turn the camera off for that. So there are the two parts after they came off the bandsaw. Wish I could show you the bandsawing operation, but it's just a little bit too dangerous to do with one hand on the iPhone and one on the wood. But that piece now is junk, and you can see that the basic shape of the Gearshift knob is starting to come into play. You've got the curve on the front there, and the shelf, the pitched shelf on the top. So we'll continue to work that down.